this lesson, we're going to learn about opposites and absolute value. We're going to look at section 0.2. It's page 19. I'm not really going to be using any of the problems from this section. If you turn to page 19 in your book, you'll see that it's a lot of crazy ways to ask different problems. I'm not necessarily going to try and trick you by asking questions in this form, but I am going to ask you what is the opposite of a number, or to evaluate something, or to tell me the absolute value, things like that. So in short, page 19, the way that they're asking the questions are pretty confusing, trying to kind of trick you. I'm not trying to do that. I just want to make sure that you know the concept. So I have written my own problems on this page. Normally I don't do this, but I have them written on here. That way you get the basics of what you need. So we're going to talk about opposites. The opposite of 15. Well, the opposite of someone who has $15 has negative $15. The opposite of someone who has negative $3 has $3. Opposite of negative 9 is a positive 9. The opposite of 5 is negative 5. So when you're looking at opposites, all you're doing is changing the sign. So this is another way of asking about opposites. Over here, they're asking for the opposite of 5. So the opposite of a positive 5 is a negative 5. The opposite of negative 9 is positive 9. The opposite of 7 is negative 7. The opposite of negative 7 is positive 7. So whenever you have a negative out in front of a set of parentheses, they're asking you to say the opposite of that number. Okay? So now let's look at absolute value. For the record, this is going to be a very short lesson because there's not really that much to it. So this is an absolute value sign. So whenever you see those long bars next to a number, that's an absolute value sign. Notice the difference between this and when we were dealing with opposites. Parentheses has more of a curvature to it, where absolute value is just simply a straight line. Okay? So absolute value, that is the number of spaces your number is from 0. Okay, number of spaces from 0. So if we're looking at the number 5, and we want to know how many spaces 5 is from 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 is 5 spaces away from 0. And we wouldn't say that it's negative 5 or positive 5 or left 5 or to the right 5. We're not going to do that. We're just going to say the number of physical spaces. So when we look at negative 3, it's 1, 2, 3 spaces from 0. So we're going to write 3. Notice how we went in different directions to 0 on the number line, but they're both still positive, okay? So when you take the absolute value of a number and it's simply the absolute value, you should always get a positive number because we're always just moving in a simple direction. So we should never be moving in a negative type of direction. So the absolute value of 1 is 1, because we would move 1 space from 1 to 0. Absolute value of negative 1 would be 1 as well, because you're moving 1 space to 0. So down here they get fancy on you. Right here they're asking you for the opposite of the absolute value of 5. So first we have to find out, what is the absolute value of 5? Well, up here we figured it out. It's 5. So now they want to know what the opposite of it is. So the opposite of the number 5 is a negative 5. So again, you take the absolute value first, and then you do the opposite of whatever that number is. So the absolute value of negative 3 is going to be a positive 3. But if we want to know the opposite of positive 3, it would be negative. Over here, The absolute value of negative 2 is a positive 2. The opposite of a positive 2 is going to be a negative 2. Okay? So on your first test, I'm going to ask you to use some inequality signs, which these are inequalities. This symbol stands for equal to. This symbol stands for less than. And notice that it looks like a little L that's a little slanted. That's how you know that it's the less than sign. Over here, this is the greater than. Okay? Another way you can think about it is, I know this is elementary, but they've got alligator teeth. But whatever way makes us remember it. So you always want the alligator teeth to be facing the bigger number because we want it to be full. We won't want it to be hungry trying to eat us. So if that helps you, great. If not, sorry. So over here, the opposite of the absolute value of negative 3. We have to figure out what number this actually is in order to tell whether it's less than, greater than, or equal to this number. So remember, we find the absolute value first. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. So the opposite of 3 is negative 3. Over here, we've got the opposite of 5. So the opposite of a positive 5 is a negative 5. So if we think about a number line, then all of our bigger numbers are down here, and our smaller numbers are down here. That's how number line works. So which number is on the bigger side? Negative 5 or negative 3? The answer is negative 3, so negative 3 is greater than negative 5. Okay? So the opposite of negative 7, notice how it's not the opposite of the absolute value. Notice the difference. If you've got the bars that are straight up and down, that's absolute value. But over here, these are parentheses. So that's why we say the opposite of negative 7. The opposite of negative 7 is a positive 7. And the absolute value of negative 6 is a positive 6. That one's pretty easy. 7 is greater than 6. So if you would like more examples of this, you can find them on your homework page. You can also find them on page 19. I hope that this has helped. Wish you the best of luck.